Now, the US President Joe Biden has told Congress dictators must pay a price, announcing a ban on Russian planes in US airspace.
Well, for more on this, Professor of International Politics at the University of Birmingham, Scott Lucas, this morning. Scott, I don't know what you made of the speech, the delivery of the State of the Nation speech from Joe Biden, but I was actually surprised that Russia hadn't already been banned from US airspace.
Eamon, that's because it's not just the U.S. acting against Ukraine. We're seeing a very coordinated response to this. So the U.S. is making sure, for example, that you get the European Union being very prominent and European states, as well as countries like Japan, Canada, and Australia. So what you will have noticed is that over the course of the past 48 hours, European after European state closed their airspace to the Russians, and then the U.S. followed. You might have noticed that the European Union, as well as European states, declared asset freezes to prevent Russian banks from operating abroad. The U.S. then followed that. I think the Biden administration is being very conscious that this just can't simply be Washington versus Moscow. So in many respects, it's the world leads and America is alongside it.
Give us some context for people who aren't aware of how much resistance there has been from the States, and I suppose you could say the same about the UK, against imposing sanctions for the last 20 years or so. I mean, it's a huge gear change from the West, isn't it? And quite rightly so, but just give us a sense of how much resistance there has been to this.
Yeah, I think that at the top, what you had was the hope for various administrations, all the way back to George W. Bush, who said, I looked into Vladimir Putin's soul and apparently found God, to the Obama administration, which tried to have a reset with Russia. There's been sort of a lack of decision when it comes to key moments. For example, the Russian assault on Syria, which has killed tens of thousands of civilians and which could be replicated in Ukraine. I think Joe Biden, who was part of the Biden administration, part of the Obama administration, I think he recognizes, and his official recognizes, they were far too weak in responding to Russia's annexation of Crimea, seizing part of Ukrainian territory. And I think in a rare point of agreement, Republicans are alongside Democrats on that. So I think it's that failure to really recognize how far Vladimir Putin would go, really for the past 15 years, that is explaining now why it's not just Joe Biden, but it's actually the U.S. system as a whole that is beginning, perhaps belatedly, to take necessary action.
Necessary action, you say in the past, Biden's been far too weak. Just want to know what you took away from his address last night. I mean, I look at this and these words, these sound bites. Freedom will always triumph over tyranny. They're just words, doesn't mean anything, and it's probably not true.
Oh, welcome to my country. Everybody's going to talk about freedom, democracy, and the wonderful American cupcakes you can eat. That's what each president does. Let's cut to the substance when you get past that rhetoric. It's not the speech that America wants. It's the speech that America needs. And by that, I mean, look, Republicans, except for action on Ukraine, are going to object to anything that the Biden administration is pursuing. I think many Democrats would have wanted Biden to restate the grand programs like Build Back Better, the social environmental programs. That's not going to happen because of Republican instruction. So when I say it's the speech that America needs, look, every country in the world is going to get hit by inflation because of supply chain issues, rising oil and gas prices. So Biden set out, I think, a practical way forward, which says, look, we are going to face inflation. This is what we need to do it. Every country is trying to overcome or at least contain coronavirus. Despite the resistance of anti-vaxxers and coronavirus deniers, Biden, I think, again, has said, we haven't won this battle, but we are continuing it. And I think, again, rather than trying to get the grand historic programs like Build Back Better, the attempt, for example, to deal with issues like child poverty and healthcare, and, at least he's talking about a practical way forward. No one's going to be completely satisfied with the speech, but in many respects, that's a testament to the fact that it wasn't playing ideology, but a just key way on what we need to do to get through this year.
And Professor, I know you're based in the UK, obviously an American here, but with this expertise in American politics as well and foreign politics. Are you able to give us a sense of what the mood is in the States? I mean, here in the UK, it seems to be cross-party. There seems to be widespread support of the sanctions. Indeed, many Brits wishing we were taking more refugees, for example. Can the same be said then in the States? Is there bipartisan support for what Biden was announcing in terms of going after the oligarchs and the no-fly zone in America?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And at a general level, you're seeing a very divided America, divided not just between Democrats and Republicans, but between Trumpists and other factions, coming together, as the world has, to support the Ukrainian people. And I think, in a sense, that's limiting the domestic division that has really marked America, not just for the Biden years, but has marked America really going back decades. And I think as long as Ukraine continues to resist and we see Russia being checked, we'll see that bipartisan approach supporting the administration, except for a couple of far-right figures, QAnon support, conspiracy theorists who heckled Biden last night, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert. I think my country has been stalled on politics for far too long. I think it's stagnated. I don't think it's been very practical. But the Ukraine issue, in many respects, is patching up a lot of the wounds that we've suffered.
It's still helping Donald Trump. He's not keeping quiet on what's being said. I mean, he's in there saying, no country was invaded on his watch, for instance, and that he had this direct line to President Putin. So he's certainly taking advantage of the momentum.
Well, he's trying to, Raymond. But I think, first of all, beyond the fact that Putin did try to undermine Ukraine on Trump's watch, something we can talk about later, when Donald Trump calls Vladimir Putin a genius, which he did, he's on the wrong side of America for a number of reasons. I think Donald Trump now, in part because of the limit on social media, in part because sometimes he's off the rails, he's off to the side now. Far more important are those politicians, almost all Republicans, who think they can use Trump's tactics to get into office or to stay in office in Congress. I'm talking about House members like Jim Jordan, Matt Gaetz. I'm talking about wannabe senators like J.D. Vance in Ohio. It's those guys who are using Trumpist rhetoric who I think we should watch, especially since this is the year of congressional elections, rather than the guy who's down in Mar-a-Lago in Florida.
I just want to ask you, I don't know if you saw Prime Minister Boris Johnson was not pounced upon, but he was sort of put under pressure by Ukrainian yesterday at a press conference in Warsaw. And the question, I suppose, to you, directed at not just the UK government, but I suppose we can put it at the States as well, is that whether or not we're taking the right strategy in handling all of this, when we've made this country give up its nuclear weapons in return and promise for defence. And there she was saying our children are being bombed, they're being blown up, there's no safe zone, this is war crimes. Are the West getting this right? Or do you think that there is a strong case, as Putin's today threatening to attack Kiev with shells, to try and take a different approach? Perhaps the no-fly zone needs to be back on the table, for example.
Belatedly, I think we are taking the right approach. Look, nuclear weapons are an aside. We have nuclear weapons, but there's no way we can use nuclear weapons without tripping World War III. The UK, the US, Europe, regrettably cannot send in military forces for a direct confrontation with Russia, including, and I say this with regret, sending in our planes to enforce a no-fly zone, because again, it risks the direct confrontation. That Putin will use that. He'll use that to say he's the victim. So what do we have to do? We have to provide the military aid for Ukrainians to resist, which is what they're doing. We have to provide the economic sanctions to put the squeeze on Russia. And we have to take the political measures. And I favor Ukraine becoming a member of the European Union. And we are only at the start of that process, but it is one to be watched.
Quickly, can that be expedited out of interest? Because Zelensky called for this 2 days ago. There's widespread support for it. But, I mean, these things are famously slow in the EU, aren't they? And what difference will it make?
Any application for membership takes years in the EU, but to see the EU already approve Ukraine's candidacy and say it will discuss it this month, that's historic to move that quickly. And even if it doesn't happen, it's a really powerful symbol to Putin. Because when Putin attacked Ukraine, it was not just simply to cut it off from NATO. It was to cut it off from Europe and to cut it off from the EU. In some respects, he fears the EU even more than NATO. So that's a big step. At the end of the day, when you've got a bully, when you've got an aggressor who thinks that Ukraine should be part of a greater Russia, you cannot stop him from waging a war on terror. But you can begin to respond in broader ways, not directly taking him on the bombing and on the missile attacks, but on the political and economic steps where Russia might occupy the country, but it will not win the country. It will not win Ukraine. And eventually hope that those around Putin, and indeed the Russian people, say this war in Ukraine, to occupy it, is not worth it at the cost of destroying our own.
Well, tell you what they could destroy. They could destroy that 40-mile convoy sitting stalled, making its way to Kiev. And I look, Scott, and I think, why? I mean, we arm Ukraine. Why aren't we arming them with attack drones on this? Turkey has been doing this to a certain degree. I mean, I don't know what size of air force Ukraine has, but they must have some sort of planes. And you've got a convoy going absolutely nowhere with fuel, with food, with logistics, with backup personnel. Why is nobody taking it out? It's just sitting there.
Great question, and it's one that I discussed with military intelligence analysts last night at length. And here's what we were trying to put together. It appears that that 40-mile convoy, which was there to get headlines, does not have Russia's best troops. It has a lot of conscripts. That it has not Russia's best equipment, it has bog standard equipment. So, in a sense, it's a decoy to take attention away from what Putin is really doing. In other words, the key forces right now are the convoys that are much smaller, but that have tried to advance on Kiev, and they have been attacked. The key forces are those who this morning are trying to enter Kharkiv, including the Russian paratroopers, and those are the ones that you want to attack. So in other respects, that 40-mile convoy was almost a distraction, it appears, because it has not moved for days. And instead of focusing on that 40-mile convoy, use your resources, which are there, but which are limited, to really focus on the Russian forces, his top forces. Because Russia's Achilles heel right now is that many of its forces are having supply problems and logistics problems to even move. And if most of the troops can't move, focus on the ones who can.
Okay, Scott, well explained. Thank you very much indeed for that. Scott Lucas is a professor of American Studies at the University of Birmingham. Thanks very much for your time and your analysis, Scott. Much appreciated.
Many thanks. Take care.
Thank you.